Our next topic is standard of deviation. First, standard deviation is like the variance. And variance and standard deviation basically tell us how spread out is the data. So how much do the data values deviate from the mean? Mean is the average. So when we're finding the standard deviation, first we want to find the mean. And this is what the mean, how the mean is represented. And X with the line over it, that's the mean. And then we want to find the difference of each data point. This X represents the different data points that we have. And then we square each of those numbers. And then this is the formula to figure out what the variance is. And the variance is represented by a Greek letter sigma squared. And then take the square root of that number, and that gives us our standard deviation. So kind of a long process. So let's get to it. So this chart is going to help us find the standard deviation and the variance. So first, this is again your data points right here. So I could write 6.9, 8.7, 7.6, 4.8, and 9.0. This number is your mean. And my mean is adding up all the numbers and divide by how many I have. So it'd be dividing by 5. And that number is going to stay the same. Each of those numbers in my chart is going to be 7.4 because the mean does not change at all. Now the next column that I have is my number minus my mean. So if you look at my chart, it's basically putting a subtraction in between each of these numbers. So you can fill that in. So when I would subtract my actual number, my data point minus my mean, these are the different numbers that I come up with. Negative 0.5, 1.3, 0.2, negative 2.6, and 1.6. And then my final column to help me find the variance and the standard deviation is taking this number here and squaring it. So I already figured out the numbers, now I just have to square each of those numbers. And you should always get positive numbers. And that is what each number squared is. Now, if you remember to figure out what the variance is, that would be the sigma squared, is going to figure out the sum. That symbol is the sum of your x minus your mean, that's squared, divided by how many numbers you actually have. So in this case, if I were to add up all of these numbers right here, I would get 11.30. So my sum would be 11.30. Again, this symbol right here says sum, divided by how many numbers I have, which is 5. So if I figure that out, my variance is going to be 2.26. Again, that's equal to my variance, my sigma squared. Now if I want to figure out what my standard deviation is, I take my variance, 2.26, and I have to take the square root of that number. That's going to give me my standard deviation. And if I take the square root of that number, I would roughly get about 1.5. So looking back, my mean is 7.4, my variance is 2.26, and my standard deviation is 1.5. Now that can take a long time if you're going to be doing this by hand. So I'm going to show you how you can use your graphing calculator. Now if you don't have one, you have to make sure that you practice in class using your graphing calculator and take good notes. So again, here is a table of data points that I'm using. The first thing you want to do is go to your stat, edit, and in L1 you want to enter your data. So in this case, it's asking what is the mean and standard deviation for this data set. So I would put in these numbers underneath my strikes. So I want to figure out how many strikes I have per decade. So in L1 you would put in each one of those numbers, and then you go to stat, calculate, and you select variance stats, option number 1. And this is what should come up for you right here. In this, it tells me now that this right here is my mean, so 17.6. This is the sum of all of my data points because this symbol says sum and it just has an X. The next one is the sum of my data points squared. You don't have to worry about this one. And then this is my standard deviation. Remember, sigma x, that's saying standard deviation of my points in the L1 category. And the n, it's saying that I have 15 different data points. So I have the mean at 17.6 and the standard deviation at 3.5. So right now I want you to attempt to use your graphing calculator and find the mean and standard deviation using these data points right here. So your mean should have been 7.27 and your standard deviation should be 3.316. Now again, you could do the long way of filling out a chart to figure out what the variance is and then standard deviation. But using your graphing calculator will help you tremendously. Remember, what does this tell us? Tell us this number right here tells us how far apart the data points lie. So the larger this number is, the farther away all your data points lie from the mean. So make sure you took good notes, especially using your graphing calculator, because I will not be helping you or reminding you. You have to make sure to have them in your notebook. Have a great day.